as well as a fireproof box,
Yep.
believe it or not.
Raising my hands like
I mean, we
this,
should have had it in
we're
front of
showing
us.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Hello, and welcome to the Retireable Podcast. I'm Mike Wallace.
And I'm John Sauger.
How the heck are you today, John?
I'm good. Little bit of organization on stuff. We're getting ourselves lined up and everything. I felt we got everything looking good now. It's all good.
No, it took a little bit longer today to set up the studio because they had some other things going on in here. But we made it.
Yeah,
We're recording about, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes later than we expected, but it's all good.
Well, if you're the listener and you noticed a delay, that's why.
Yeah, there's a delay.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly right. Exactly right. So John, I wanted to talk a little bit about today. I just got back from the Schwab conference for Charles Schwab last week. Yeah. So I love to go to these conferences. It's a huge conference. There's over like 4,500 advisors, some of the top advisors in the entire,
all basically independent advisors throughout the country.
They bring in all the different sponsors and vendors. So there's a lot of different, all the latest and greatest technology that's there. And so, and they have a lot of different breakout sessions. And so a couple of us from the office went and we learned different things. And it was, so one of the things that was probably the theme of this year is what they call private equity. Okay. And so we've all heard, maybe not we all have heard, but many of us have heard over the years that, all the wealthy people, they invest in these private equity and they're expecting higher returns, but it really has not been able to be transcend down to the average investor until the last year or two. Okay. And so now, just to give you an example, that they have funds out there that you and I could buy that would own, let's say, whatever
fractional share
of like the Denver Broncos, for example,
Right.
And so there's a lot of different things we can use. We're going to do a separate podcast on that. So I'm not going to get into the weeds with that kind of stuff, but I just thought that was kind of interesting that that was one of the themes. And then of course, AI. Okay.
Sure.
So we've done, podcasts on AI as well. But it's evolved so stinking fast. It's just crazy.
Well, the interesting thing on private equity is if you're listening to this and you're local to the Michigan area, or really you're anywhere in Big Ten country, private equity is very front and center with the Big Ten right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a private equity company, the pension system in California, that's trying to offer a private equity deal to the Big Ten for rights and broadcasting rights. So, you're kind of seeing it now more prevalent in good and bad ways in society right now. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and you probably heard too. Yeah, not only the Big Ten, but they're like literally thinking about, like, let's say a private equity would take over Michigan Wolverines.
Sure.
And then and they would have their independent brand like Notre Dame would be, and not even be part of the Big Ten. Just the stuff that you're hearing is crazy when it comes down to that.
And it's one of those things where we are definitely in a changing time. Yeah. Right. And that's where part of our conversation comes in when we talk about stuff, is that changing time. I hear people, like you said, with AI, how fast AI is moving, but on the other side of the coin, how off it is on the finance side, right? That there's so much money that has to be put into AI to figure things out. And again, we're still in a spot where we haven't seen a profit on anything on AI. It's just numbers. So it's so interesting how that is happening and where it's going to go to, right?
Well, and a lot of it is like, in our industry is very rules and regulated, right? And so a lot of confidentiality too, right? And so a lot of that AI is out there on the cloud or the internet and so forth. Yeah, sure, exactly. Sure. So we can't even use a lot of that stuff right now, but it's just there are ways that we're going to be able to start using it that's a little bit more secure, for cybersecurity, and that we're not sharing information. And so there's a lot of the different things. In fact, our company's done it ourselves, is we have our own bot, so everything's internal, so we can keep everything secure in a secure location. And we're in the process of working all that stuff out as well. But it is really amazing the advances and what it can do. And we're learning about it all the time when it comes down to that. But there's a lot of cool things that are out there. We saw a lot of famous authors and a lot of motivational speakers and so forth too. And so it's always a nice, good, friendly reminder. First of all, follow your passion and do the things you love. And obviously we're doing this podcast and we both love our jobs, and it's just, unfortunately, not everybody has that luxury, and so when I hear some of these individuals that are talking about being positive and follow your passions and do the things you love, and spend the time doing the things you love, I do feel blessed when that
Yeah,
happens
absolutely,
too,
absolutely.
so
There was a book I read a number of years ago, and it was the premise. It was there were basically two mountains in your life, and the first mountain is you're trying to get personal and professional success. You're trying to get whatever your personal success is, maybe getting married, having a family, having a house, whatever the case may be, and then your professional success of trying to get to the high point of whatever career you've hopefully chosen, and then you get there and you go, okay, now I've reached this. I want to now leave purpose. I'm towards the end of things. I'm looking at this other mountain going, wait a minute, over there is leaving a legacy and leaving. And that's where so many of the families we talk about where they get to. And that second mountain is where we're unique in our job. Our first mountain and second mountain are merged together, right? There's a bridge between them because you can still leave. We're fortunate in our job, you can still leave a legacy and still be in the same profession you've started in. Whereas a lot of people have to leave a profession to go to the next part, right? If you're, hey, I did this particular job where I made a lot of money in private practice, well, maybe then you want to move to the public sector and be helpful or something. That sometimes you have to change stuff. But
yeah.
my wife is literally undergoing that right now. She's leaving one job and career and switching to another one where she's kind of at the spot of saying that she's actually going to work for a not-for-profit. And she's like, I want to, I believe in this and I want to do this. And that's really, and you see that with people a lot.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's
you
really
bet.
interesting how you bring that up.
Yeah, and then, I always talk about that too, is when I do eventually retire, or our jobs, we have a ability to hang on for quite some time or do more of like a summer retirement, and be able to have that free up that time to give our gifts back to the
Sure.
community and so
Absolutely.
forth, and so because there was some give and take as we grew up our careers too, right?
Absolutely.
So it's our time, and so to be able to use that in, but whether it's a nonprofit, which is probably more what I'm looking for too,
Sure.
to just to help out. Now, I don't know if I'd work for one. I think it would be more the volunteer and raise money for,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
at least some of that stuff
I'll have
too.
my wife reach out to you.
Okay,
Do that
perfect.
offline.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, yeah.
Sure.
You know, I went to Catholic school. I'm always donating to something. I mean, anybody comes to me, wants something, here you go. Because
Absolutely.
I was always asking, so I'm always giving. So
Absolutely.
I get that. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about our topic then today. So one of the things we wanted to discuss, and I know we've had on our podcast before our founder Richard David James, and there's some of the things that we've organized through our company itself that we want to kind of share with you, and the importance of utilizing some of these tools that are available. So John, why don't you kind of give the background of our company itself, and then the evolution of what we're going to talk about today.
So the premise behind this was that, like any financial company, when you start, you're trying to help people make more money, right? That's what it seems like the job is. It seems like what it's at. When the owner of our company, Richard, when he was a young man, he came home one day and his mom and his grandmother were there, crying, and found out that grandfather had passed away, and it kind of changed things. And what he had realized was, um, they had basically there was sadness, but then there was also the, "Oh my gosh, what do we do now?" And they asked him, "You're in this field. Can you help us?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely. What have you done?" And found out that really nothing had been done, and none of the planning, none of the steps. And so he said, I can't handle it all today right now because I need to go back and organize this. But let me go back and look at this. And so he came back shortly thereafter and came up with 67 questions that needed to be answered when a person passes away. And some of those are simple questions like, what do you do it for a funeral or for final situation. And some of them are long-term things. What are you doing with this property? Or what are you doing with these accounts or whatnot? And so in that situation, he sat down and he looked and he said, there are many, many, many people that try and get into this industry to make clients money and thereby make themselves money. And I'm not begrudging that. That is very important. But what he looked at is he said, I want to build a company that looks at people and looks at this differently. It's not just about the money. It's about the legacy, like we were talking about in our open. It's about what they're doing. And so he wanted to build a program that took care of people, not just with their finances, but with everything. And so he built out a questionnaire or a pamphlet, I guess I should say, that is the 67 questions that the average person has to take care of when someone passes away. And so we've built a program around that to sit down with people and say, this is what we want to make sure you're taking care of. And invariably, when we sit down with people, people have money, they have, and they have some of this taken care of, but almost every single person hasn't taken care of everything. And when we go through it with people, it is the feedback of, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we did that. It's peace of mind. It's so important. And so,
Well, and in reality, it changed the destination of our entire company, and
absolutely.
obviously what we've done. And so, when he was a young man, he was trained to work with the ultra wealthy,
Yeah.
and so that's really that all the as an advisor, everybody's trying to find the wealthy individuals to deal with. And then once his grandmother passed away, or grandfather passed away, I should say, found out that what there really isn't a lot of companies there to service the middle class.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and so it's evolved with us as well, not only serving the middle class, and nowadays a lot of these middle class, when I first got into business, we were more working, a lot of the working class that may have, three to $500,000, but these are now 30 years later are the middle class millionaires that we're dealing
Sure.
with oftentimes
Sure.
too. And the issue is, it, it, not the finances are an important part of it, but one of the reasons that our firm is so successful is because we have that holistic approach.
Yep.
And so it is that organization, it's that peace of mind of knowing if you do set up things in advance, then you don't have to have that worry, that conversation, and sit there and say, and that panic, because you've planned
Well, and
for all aspects.
Well, and what's changed so much through the years, you're talking about like what's changed. There's the simple stuff that we've talked about in other episodes. Like people used to have pensions and now they have, 401ks or 403bs or IRAs. Those things have changed. But there's the things that sometimes people don't think about. So much more of our lives are being led digitally or being led online. There's so much there that comes into this that people haven't even thought of. Or so much of our stuff is in a different fashion, right? Back in the old days, you had the chock full of nuts can and you could put money in there. If most people don't have all of their assets in their house. Their house might be an asset, but their other assets are somewhere else, and it's not in physical form, right? It might be on a computer screen somewhere. So that part of it has changed as well. It's all the little things that have changed over time that we have to make sure people are aware of and paying attention to.
No, you're right. I mean, back in the day, you would like rifle through file cabinets, but everything's electronic
Right,
nowadays,
right,
right?
right.
And there's some, as some of the companies that we deal with, personally, it is all electronic. They don't even allow, just
Right.
for
You don't get a statement
you
and
don't
you
get a
don't
statement,
yeah.
so you have to then you have to be, go through things electronically. And even it's funny that you say that. Just this week, I had recently got a new phone. Of course, all my kids have had new phones for many years, but my wife and I finally broke down and got ourselves the new iPhone 17, I don't know, Pro, whatever it is. And so when I was setting it up, they just did an update recently, and they said, "Okay, do you want to do facial recognition, as an extra step on my phone?" And I thought about it for a second, but then I was like, "Okay, well, if I don't care if if my wife gets on my phone, she knows my password. My kids sometimes have to get into my phone, for password. If I have facial recognition, then they won't be able to have access to my phone even. And so
So your password isn't 0000?
it is.
Oh, see,
No,
okay, there.
no, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh,
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, but needless to say, it just and it's interesting because some of that security has to be pretty secure, right?
sure.
And some things may not have to be as bad, but the issue is it's just setting things up like that, even understanding.
Well, and as we're talking about this, I heard an author, was actually, I heard him speaking, and it's a really famous guy. He's been in all you've seen him all kinds of different stuff on TV. I mean, really, really good thinker when he talked about stuff. And one of the things he said was that moving forward from this point forward, and our older generation tries to get away from this, but it's not really necessarily working. But if you're probably 60 or younger, right? Certainly our age, certainly Dave's age, we're if we're talking age, the statement is that you will be within 3 feet of your phone 95% of your life.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't that is insane when you start thinking about that? Now, yeah, you're times where you do type of stuff. We were talking about this. My wife and I were talking about this, and there was a point where we were scuba diving. I was like, yeah, that doesn't. Oh no, we both had our phones in like she had her phone in a waterproof case so she could take some pictures.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have my phone on me because I had an underwater camera, but the phone was on the boat, and yes, I guess I wasn't within 3 feet of the boat, but okay, that's that small percentage of time. But yeah, isn't that so that has changed how we transact, how we pay attention to things, how our lives are lived. Again, And it's things we probably didn't think about. My son and I were having this conversation, how much money is invested in certain things of his that another person might not see as value, but he does. And it's like, well, Dad, I have a lot of money in this particular video game account. Okay, well, that's, or he has money in different things that somebody else might not find. Like, there are a lot of people that are still have cryptocurrency that he might have cryptocurrency, right? So there's a difference in that situation. But again, knowing that is for every family, cryptocurrency in a wallet, that's a unique password. Boy, that's something that more often than not, the person doesn't remember the huge password, but you have to convey those
No,
things.
that's an amazing point because a lot of those accounts are only online,
Sure.
right? And some of them are app driven too,
Yep.
right? So if you don't have that, unique,
Yep.
password for that may never be able to find any of that stuff.
Right.
Crypto is a real good example because there is no paper, right?
Right. Right.
You
Right.
don't get your statement in the mail for
Right.
cryptocurrency,
Right.
right? So, so yeah, there's a lot of different things we have to consider. So we wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about that, and I think that's a really good place to start is making sure that we have a place, and that's when we do have an organizer that we do give
Yep.
people, the
Yep.
people that come into our office and meet with us, that has the 67 decisions, as well as a fireproof box,
Yep.
believe it or not.
Raising my hands like
I mean, we
this.
should have had it in
We're
front of
showing
us.
it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, needless to say, but I think and again, when we deal with the financial stuff that we have to deal with, having the passwords and knowing where our passwords are and having them secure. In a lot of places, there's two-factor authentication
Sure.
nowadays. But even if you have
Right.
the password, well, then they're going to send you a text to
To
your
your phone.
phone, right? And so if my wife can't get in the phone, how could there's
Well,
just lots of different things we have to consider.
and I think we're as we're having this conversation because we've been in this industry a long time. The good news and bad news of this. The good news is we have a lot of experience in this. The bad news is it means people have passed away
Yeah,
that we've worked with, and clients and family members and whatnot that we've seen. If you separate the emotion from it when we're having this conversation, that is really the first thing we have to address. It's the most emotional time, or one of the most emotional times you're ever going to have in your life. I heard someone say it's probably one of the worst. When you're in a situation with dealing with this, it's more than likely your spouse, a parent, or a sibling, child, someone very close to you, a friend or whatnot, but someone very close to you. So it is probably one of your top handful of worst days of your life.
exactly.
So your emotions are in a totally different situation. So we're coming at this conversation. We're probably not the right people to talk to on the emotional side of this. That's counseling and different conversations. And so we're not going to necessarily address that. We're talking about it from the business side, which is where we are uniquely qualified to do this. And so looking at it from the business side, there are basic things that we're skipping over, right? We're kind of skipping over the funeral process and the end of life process because there are simple things there that you need to handle that even if we tell you now, you have to go through it, right? You kind of have to experience it. There's a part when a person passes away where if you're in charge, you have to figure out where the body is going.
Yeah. Well, and
That's
even
something we really can't prepare you for.
Well, even the funeral ceremonies and things that are happening now has changed, evolved so much. When back in the day was, you were at the funeral home for, 2 or 3
Okay.
evenings
Yep. Yep.
oftentimes. And then you had an official funeral.
Yep.
Oftentimes, you may have one day of visitation or may have no
Yep.
visitation and just either have
Right.
a funeral, or sometimes you don't have either one of those. And then it's just a memorial.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Or months later, celebration of life afterwards,
yeah,
right?
exactly right.
So different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's important though that it's communicated
Yeah.
to,
That's the key.
to the family
Yep.
because, my dad, when he passed away, was very specific on his instructions, and now my stepmom has all those instructions as well now too. But the fact is, so I don't have to think, okay,
Right.
and there's other things too, is a list of even, people. She's got friends and family that I don't have any contact with,
Correct.
so we,
Correct.
we want to make sure that we
Well,
have a list of those individuals. And then, of course, what the wishes are. Those are the simple things. But again, it's just going to make it easier because it's going to happen. She's 90 years old,
yeah.
eventually. She's in good health now. Okay. But the issue is, so we want to we want to be able to grieve with a family and not have to think and do all that stuff.
And again, knowing how to communicate those things. In the old days, that was a phone tree, and you had to call all these different people. And nowadays, sometimes people just put the notes out there. My wife and I were talking about this before. I don't have social media. So if you just put it on social media, I'm more than likely not going to know about it unless she's aware and tells me. So it's like there are methods of things that you have to figure out. Okay, how do we
Or just
that
because you have one social media doesn't mean that you
yes,
have
you
all
know.
social media. Yeah. So
But that's a um God willing, you have a conversation about that,
yeah.
right? That it's not a fun conversation necessarily to have for some people. There are other people that are a little more comfortable with it, and that my experience. I've had a number of different family members, number of different friends that are very comfortable with. Hey, I'm not getting out of here alive, so I'm going to pass away at some point. So here's what I want you to do, right? My mom has picked some of the songs she wanted, right? My dad's funeral was pretty much stuff he had set up. I mean, he had everything organized, and we just had to follow and he was retired, or, he was through the military, so he was buried at, the military, the cemetery, does it a certain way. There's all kinds of things that you get to experience there. That um, takes peace of mind and takes stuff off there. However, we can't necessarily tell you what to do in that situation except try and have that conversation, right? That's the first thing we would say.
Yeah, it's the preparation of that,
So,
and then a lot of it then too is okay is if you have this stuff organized, people then aren't panicking that first day, two, three, and a lot of times what we try to do as an organization is there's nothing if you have everything set up beforehand, there's really nothing you have to do those first couple of days except be with family. Obviously you still got to plan the funeral, things like that, but as far as all the other ancillary things because we've already organized it, so, you have the proper estate plan, for example, make sure that that's organized. Make sure that that people, the loved ones know where the assets are, like one of the things that we do as an organization is when we meet with our clients, yeah, at least annually, oftentimes several times a year, we have a list of assets and we put together their outside assets too on
sure.
one piece of paper, you
Right.
know,
Somebody else.
so at least, that someone can look at it instead of having to rifle through
Yep.
passwords and rifle through other things, they have at least a place that has all that information. So that's a really important thing to have in a organizer as well.
Well, and if you're listening to this and you haven't done this and you're thinking, oh, well, people know people, you play the game and ask people at the holidays or when you're sitting down with at a party or whatnot. You just ask people, what do you know? What would you do in this situation if it were me? And more often than not, it's not going to be the answer you're looking for. So it is good to have this conversation. There were things like we didn't know what my dad's rank was in the military. My
Oh
brother
yeah.
had my brother had to research it and find it, which my dad had told my brother. So that was something we had to. But one of the one of the one of the things that I bring up, and I don't want it to sound negative, but if you're on the fence on this, one of the things when you have this conversation is why it's such a gift, is because again, if you're gone, the people that are still here, your loved ones, it is a very emotional time.
Yeah.
Well, in that emotional time, it's very hard to make the perfect decision in emotional time. So you want to take that away from them. I don't want my family to have to think about anything. What did dad want? What did my husband want? Et cetera. Here's what it is. Don't think about anything because I want you to worry about yourself.
Yeah.
I don't want you to, well, dad wanted this or would have wanted that. The other thing is that it is an industry. So I don't want them to have to worry about, oh, did we get the right casket? I don't want a casket, so I don't need to spend money on the nicer one versus what that's a not nicer one, right? I don't need that emotional stuff in there. So you want to have that conversation. It is a gift that you're leaving for your family. It's not that they don't want it to. I mean, again, I don't think anybody wants to talk about your passing, right? That's not.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have. You can just put it down in writing. Say, this is what I want. Here you go. Here's where it is.
What that also does help is you're now carrying out mom or dad's wishes or your
Yep.
brother's wishes or spouse's wishes, and also can eliminate some of the conflict that
Absolutely.
happens because it's an
Absolutely.
emotional time. Oftentimes, it just
Yep.
automatically presents conflict, and if now you and I can agree because
It's there in
it's
writing.
already there in writing, right?
Yep.
So we don't have to fight over
Or what?
what mom or dad really wanted
Sure.
or what somebody wanted because we've gotten that clear
Sure.
clear
Sure.
cut
Sure.
when it comes down to that. So I think that's a really good point.
All right, so if we then jump and say, okay, we're going past this, now we're talking about the actual what's left behind, right?
Yes.
So so if we're talking about what's left behind, I think the first thing to keep in mind on this is more often than not, it doesn't have to be immediate lose sleep. I have to make this decision by a certain time today or tomorrow. More often than not, you have time on this,
Mhm.
right? There are little things that might come up, but more often than not, the little things are probably not things that are that big of a deal, right? You might have to reach out to your loved one's doctor to say, hey, they're not going to be at the doctor's appointment next week, right?
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, that's not something necessarily you need to lose sleep over.
Yeah.
That stuff happens all the time, right? On the big picture stuff, the assets, the finances, et cetera, you have time on that.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's, I think, the first thing we have to address is you do have time to make good decisions and to be comfortable with it. The other side of that causes a problem, though. If you do have time, it's what's called a non-adversarial process, meaning you have all the time in the world. So a lot of places assume that, so it might not happen as fast as you want it to be. So keep that in mind as we talk through this.
Yeah, and that is a good point because what is time and how when should it be settled and how long of it is and as planners
I think we
we
went to a
often
different podcast if you just said, what is time?
what is time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to a different podcast now.
Oh, there you go.
That's a
What is
different,
time? No, I'm kidding.
it's
So
a
I
philosophical
But
conversation.
what I mean by that is, what is quick for one person may be slow for
Sure.
somebody else,
Sure.
and when we look at it and say maybe 6 months is reasonable, somebody else may say maybe 2 months is reasonable
Right.
when it comes down to
And somebody else might go into it thinking it was going to be 6 days, and I took
it.
2 days off next week. It should be done, right?
Yeah.
They don't if you don't know.
So we get that's what I talk about. What is time when we have to define it, but also we look at things oftentimes as a tax year, okay?
Sure.
Because right, if we don't settle things by a tax year, oftentimes you have to now file tax returns for another tax year.
Sure.
So not that if somebody dies in November, it's got to be by the end of the year. But oftentimes, if we're looking at that, that's a reasonable. Or somebody dies in February, it'd be reasonable to
Yeah.
say, okay,
Yep.
let's try to wrap this up by the end of the year at least,
Yep.
right? When it comes
Yep.
down to that, so it's just kind of looking at it that way, and does it have to be settled by then? No, it doesn't. But we're trying to make it easier, and also
Absolutely.
trying to, if we can, especially if it's a spouse, or husband and wife, they file jointly tax year, and so if there's
Sure.
going to be any taxable events, if we're going to now start pushing it off to, years down the road, maybe a single taxpayer instead, so
Yeah.
there's lots of
Yeah.
things we have to consider when we look.
Well, and as you start talking about that, as you start talking about the if we're looking at this from the family and what they have to handle, you can look at it in different ways. If we're looking at this from you, the listener, saying, what would I want my family to handle if I was gone? You're looking at it a little bit differently, right? You're kind of coming at it
Yeah.
from two different angles here. If we come at it from saying, hey, it's you and you're leaving this, the least amount of decisions somebody has to makes it easier for them, right? But also understand that what we're trying to do is give options. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when we're going to go, under what conditions, what the situation is going to be. We just know it's going to happen. Well, when it does, in most of the thoughts of the people we've worked with, they just want their family to have options, and they want their family to be able to do what's in their best interest at the time. They don't want the government to get more than their fair share, right? They don't want to lose anything to any silly fees or costs or anything. So you're trying to avoid that. That's when you're talking about assets. So you're trying to address that. So a lot of the planning is trying to say, hey, this event happened. Now you have these two or three options. Which do you feel most comfortable with? And in an ideal situation, you can do those two or three options per individual. The family doesn't have to agree on everything. Maybe one child wants to do it one way and a different child wants to do it a different way. That seems to be a lot of the things that we see that work the most successful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, and it's a matter of. I like the word you said earlier about that. It's a gift that you're giving your loved ones if you organize things, because it can make things so much more easier and simpler. But it could be in many different aspects. We talk about the finances of the funeral, but even like let's say personal effects,
Sure.
and so forth. So when we're dealing with that. Uh, Especially when you have large families. I come from a family of 9 kids, and so, my mom passed away, in 1995, okay, so a long time ago, and my sisters were fighting over her rosary. They both said that mom promised, there's 4 girls, 2 of my sisters were fighting over the rosary, and so then my dad was gonna try to give away some of the jewelry, but basically, like, stopped right there and
Yeah.
said, "Okay, there's 9 kids, there's 4 girls." And so, like, to this day, so then my dad did remarry. He remarried for almost 25 years before he passed away. My stepmom's still alive today. And so that jewelry from 1995 is still sitting there, right? And guess,
Yeah.
and me and my brother, who are the trustees, are the
I
going to
have to deal
people
with it.
that have to deal with it. And so that is going to be, again, if there are certain things that can be spelled out to individuals, and it may not be, it's not, we do have clients right now that I know that like literally have pieces of artwork um, in their house, and then they put their names or like just like
Yeah.
little on the tables or like
Yeah.
the furniture, like literally the names are
Yeah.
at stickers to go to who it's going to. But we may not need to go that far.
Sure.
But there's a lot. What we have found, oftentimes, not all the time, but it's the sentimental things that oftentimes create more grief than
Yeah.
the valuable things.
Yeah.
And so, if there can be a way to to divvy that up into some of that sentimental things, and that it's now mom and dad's wishes, so that the whoever's handling the
Sure.
estate might be able to make things a little bit easier.
Well, and in that situation, boy, we can go through so many different examples
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the issues. I've heard two. One was a way just to that a client gave out her name, but let's just say she was grandma. She gave out grandma bucks. And everybody got a certain amount of grandma bucks, and then they had an auction after she passed. And if this was really important to you, you could spend all your grandma bucks on that. If not, you could do and anything at the end of the auction that nobody wanted was donated to charity and stuff. And so that was a nice way of trying to avoid any conflict, and people had some fun with it. So and they were
That's a
able to get
cool
together.
idea.
So
I've never heard that. Yeah.
that was a fun one. The other one is the I've heard of a few that just dealt with logic. We had a family that uh, the mom or grandmother was, the big cook. And again, big Irish Catholic family. There's, 10 kids and all the cooking recipes. And so the main cookbook that she used all the years had her notes in there. So it was like her note, like, let's just, use a cup of, a half a cup of sugar, and it crossed out stupid. Don't use that. Do it, and so her personality was in the book.
Uh,
And so everybody wanted the book, and there was a bit of a fight over. And one of the kids came forward and said, "The original book is just going to go over here. No one gets the original book. I made a photocopy and had a reprint of the book, so now
yeah.
everyone gets a book, right?" And so they destroyed the original book once they made copies of it. And I was like, okay, now nobody got it, and nobody's hurt, but everybody has it. So you see things like that, and that's something that every family is going to have to try and work through. The goal there, I think, for most parents is you don't want your kids to have a difficult situation, right? So you're trying to leave some sort of conversation on that. What I would say is, because we can talk for hours on this, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at this a little bit differently. What are let's maybe say two or three things, putting you on the spot here. What are the two or three things that you would say most people are concerned about when it happens? Like most people have issues with.
So I think the just making sure that you have the proper plan in general. So whether it's when we deal with it, we call it an estate plan, because it doesn't may include a trust or a will as well, but it has the powers of attorney, powers of
Sure.
attorney for healthcare and all that stuff. Because it's leading up to that. Oftentimes there's decisions that have to be made.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
and so I just want to make sure that I think the one thing is that peace of mind of knowing that if something were to happen to you, you've already named who should be taking care of your estate, and then how it's to be divided.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
and have backups on that too.
Okay.
So like if someone, oftentimes if something happened to one of their children, they want their share to go to the grandkids. That so
Yep.
to have that. So I think the estate plan is probably the one of the
Probably the
critical
biggest one.
things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think secondly would be to make sure the people know where the assets are. If there's life insurance, if there's sometimes they might have been retired for 30 years, but they
Yep.
still have a $10,000 life insurance policy through
Yep.
their employer.
Yep.
So understanding that kind of stuff, the of course the assets themselves, and I think lastly, and again I could probably name 10 things, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
But I think the passwords and the evolution of how
Yeah.
that information
Really
is
good one.
stored, I think that those are going to be things that are going to be some critical things.
Absolutely.
But I do like the fact we were talking about more like the personal effects or the funeral and what the wishes are. I think that I'm going to add that fourth one is that we know what the wishes are of that person, so that we can honor those wishes. And of course, if that gift that you had said of telling those people to make sure that it's taken care of.
Well, and those are great things. Those are great things because those are born through experience, right? We've seen it so often. I think the only thing I would add is with each of the ways you're saying saying stuff, I might add like a little bit, like when you're saying, okay, who's doing what in the estate planning, who's handling stuff. Sometimes it's nice if you think there's going to be a problem to at least explain why. Hey, so and so is doing this. My brother is the power of attorney for healthcare. Why? He's a cop. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's not going to be as emotional as emotional as my sister and I, and he might be. But we're a lot, we're assuming he's probably not going to be. And his wife is also a police officer. So like, if he's not emotional, we can bring her in to, so we can. So there's a logic there. I deal with finances. I'm the one in charge of the finances, right? I mean, so there's a logic to my family, but every family might have reasons, right? And it might just simply be oldest to youngest. It might be who lives closest. It might be job based on your job. There's many different things, but maybe having the reason why so kids don't feel offended, right? And that's just kind of one of the things to pay attention to. The other part that I think is I say this jokingly, but I mean it. Every family has one. And more often than not, it's an in-law, and I don't mean that mean, but that's just what we've seen, and it's because the kids are just like, well, that's my brother and my sister, that was my mom or my dad, whatever happens, happens. But the in-laws, they have their own parents, their own siblings, and they still may have been a part of the family for a long time, but it is still slightly different, right? And so every family has one. If you don't know who it is, the running joke is it's you.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But if not, that might be something just to make sure as the parent to go, okay, hey, I want to make sure this part isn't cause a problem.
Well, you and I have seen a lot over our years. And now the good news is it's not as frequent as many may think, but we have seen,
Sure.
like you said, that person. And one of the sayings that my wife and I, because we've ran through this throughout our lifetime in many different scenarios, is that dysfunction is normal. You know what I mean? So it is very often that you see kind of stuff like that there's going to be some type of dysfunction in that process. So yeah, the more you can spell it out and go forth and go forth with the proper information, you can make better decisions. And I just want to add one last thing. I know we're getting a little bit long here, long-winded. Is one thing we did not discuss, but we want to make sure that I want to address it. Is we're in the age of blended families,
Sure.
as well, and so sometimes it's maybe you've lost a spouse, or maybe you have a longtime spouse and you divorced 30 years ago, but you want to make sure that when that it's organized that way as well, because if it's not set up properly, that can cause a lot of issues between some of those blended families.
Well, and it's a great point. The other thing that I would say, the last thing I would say is, I'm not trying to cause worry or issue on this, but the document itself, let that be the quote unquote bad guy.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly right.
Document says this is what we have to do, right? You don't want them mad at each other. You don't want anybody mad at you. You don't, hey, no, this is how the document was created. That's it. You can let the document be if there's going to be a bad guy, let it be the document, let it be the unknown, attorney that they've never met. Oh, the attorney said we should do it this way. It can still be your decisions, but you don't have to, don't harm stuff emotionally over something as trivial as that. Right. So keep that one in mind too. So
Exactly right. So, John, if they wanted to get more information on any of this stuff, where do we go to?
So we have the phone number,
Okay.
which is 800-977-9292, or the website.
The website, fsa1.com. Okay. So obviously you can actually, if you want to schedule a meeting with either of us or just get some more information, we'd be happy to sit down with you virtually, in person, conference call, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's get to our next segment here, John. So our last segment is Holistic Happenings. Holistic Happenings, as a holistic planning firm, where we look at things through different lenses, not just the finances, but could be the estate planning, the taxes, and other, insurances and other things as well. But we want to just kind of, in our day-to-day operations, as we're running into things, just share some of the things that we run into that may be helpful, that you may, the listener may be able to take advantage of. So what have you ran into recently, John?
So it's interesting because every time we go through this, you could literally just walk in and just throw that at me, and I can stop and think of something, because we do see it so often. It's
not every day, but several times a week, right? Yep.
It's part of our job, and so one of the things I try and look at is what other people might be seeing, right? And if I can convey this, it's like when you say so and so was in a car accident, most people think about that differently. They're like, well, other people get in car accidents. We don't think of ourselves going out and getting right.
Yeah, yeah.
So trying to say this is something that I saw with somebody, most people might look and go, that's never going to happen to me. That's not a big deal. Well, this one is the, had a family last week. He's a couple years from retirement in his mind. The wife is a couple years older. She's ready to walk into retirement going into next year. And he just got to notice that his job is being eliminated. And so it's that, whoa, I thought I was in my prime earning years before retirement. And now I don't have that job, and where am I going from planning and where, and this, especially in where our main headquarters is in Troy, Michigan, and this in the Metro Detroit area, we're seeing that quite a bit with the automotive industry right now, and some slowdowns and some adjustments. We're seeing a lot of that. So it was a unique conversation of, here's our planning, here's what you've done, here's where you're at, here's what you could do. And so we went through the conversation, and what's interesting about this is from the holistic planning side. Have we already done the estate planning? Yes. All that it has been addressed and up there. Have they done their finances and organized and drawn down their debt and looked at income and all these things? Yes. But again, they were looking at it down the road. Well, we're not going to need this for a few years, right? So he's a little bit younger than when he optimally wanted to start taking Social Security, and they're not on Medicare yet. So they're going to need some health care, and they're going to need, he still was envisioning he wanted to work. So now has he become work optional, and where's that job, and what's that going to be? So you look at it, it's very interesting. And I want to try and convey this. There are two conversations happening there, and two totally different. There's the actual numbers, and the numbers and the conversation more often than not is very brief and very easy. Numbers are numbers, right? This is what it is. This is where you're at. Here's where it's going to be. More often than not, it's, yes, if you worked a few more years, things would be easier, but you're probably okay now. And a lot of the families that we're working with, right? That's fair. There are some people that aren't that situation. You have to work through that. You need to figure that part out. But then there's the other side of it, which is the emotional side of it. And that's a totally different conversation of figuring out, well, where does it fit emotionally? And that's a much longer conversation. It might take, even if you're planning on retiring, it might take you 6 months to feel comfortable being retired afterwards, or a year or whatnot, right? And so in that situation, there's two different things. And so I saw a family last week, got the separation notice, kind of looking at it. Well, the conversation started with, where are our numbers? Where's everything? He was perfectly understanding of the numbers. The meeting was to make sure he and his wife were on the same page. She was not necessarily. He had done all of the stuff going forward. Yeah. So we got her comfortable and got her involved. We checked off. You've already done this. You've already done this. We went through our SMART planning, our SMART analysis, right? That a lot of people have seen, the sources of income, the medical expense planning, the advanced tech, the advanced care. We went through all the different conversation points. We checked this off. We're working on this, et cetera. And so we got to a comfortable spot, and then we started talking about, well, what does it look like? Well, that's when it opened up, and it was a really good conversation. He's like, well, I hated my job. This is a blessing. These numbers are okay, but I'm going to find something else to work. And it didn't have to be at that job. He could go to, and I'm certainly not picking on Home Depot, but he's like, John, I could go to Home Depot and get a job there and be perfectly happy. I don't need to make what I was making. I need to make X. Figure out what X is for me, that if I make that, my wife isn't worried about stuff. And so we went through the kind of the planning, and so that conversation was really important, that we had relationship and some relationship equity that we could talk about. It was really important that we knew numbers and were organized on stuff. It was really important we had a process that could give them peace to say, we have this SMART process that we've retired thousands of people over the years, and you're in that. You're unique to yourselves, but you're no different than anybody else, and you have the same goals and objectives, right? You don't want to run out of wealth before you run out of health. You want to have a great retirement, right? All the things we believe in. So we were able to take them through a proven process that they could find peace with, and then allow the emotion to catch up. And so it was a longer conversation last week. It's still developing. We're going to have a few more, not on the finance side though, but we're going to have a few more. It's under the guise of finances, but we're really having emotional conversations on stuff, getting them.
No, it is so interesting, because I probably run into something similar to that, maybe once a month or once every 2 months. And it's not always even just that I lost my job. I just, like you said, I hate my job, and it's not good for my health. Sure. I know one client recently had a heart attack, and he's like, it's stressful.
Why am I doing this? Yeah.
And so he's going to retire, but the similar conversations that we're having. And a lot of it too is what's the difference different. So we went to work 3 more years. So if I want to retire early, what does that look like? Let's say I wanted to delay my Social Security, and it may not be like you said, like you're not picking at Home Depot, but it may be that job where the difference is not I need to get a job in the same career and make
Sure, sure.
$100,000 a year, whatever it may be. But the difference might be it just if I could just bridge the gap from now till 65 or 67 to Social Security,
Sure.
and I can make $20,000 or $30,000 a year,
Then I'm not digging into I'm not digging into my retirement accounts.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but knowing that we have a plan and conversation, we can put the math
Yep,
down
yep.
and figure that out.
And the other part of that, Mike, that is wholly unique about it is we see it so often. It is commonplace, and there's a plan and a proven process. That's what a person is relying on because they don't see
It shouldn't happen maybe once, right, in their lifetime, right? They may retire twice, but yeah,
Right,
exactly.
they don't want to get practiced it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they don't see it. Like you don't have a conversation with somebody going, "Hey, you retired. Tell me exactly what you make right now. How'd you do it, etc." It's just a taboo subject, right? And the How to Retire for Dummies book really doesn't explain all the processes. So this is why it's important to talk to somebody. In it's why I feel in that conversation where I feel one of the things that makes us unique. And again, we're doing this podcast to try and explain different things and build relationships and let people get to know things. This is one of the things I think we are most uniquely qualified to have conversation on is just because we've seen it more than others.
Well, and it's one of the things I love about my job too is I mean, literally in the offices, you could see people that like they're not sleeping at night. They're so worried about it. And then we can go through the numbers and you could like see their blood pressure like physically dropping in front of you. And that breath of fresh air, like literally I've gotten hugs out of my office, like, oh my gosh, we can do this,
Absolutely.
And it's that peace of mind of
Yep.
knowing. And even though a lot of people think that they're okay, they just, it's just,
need to hear it.
they need to see it. And
Yep.
everybody, just that confidence,
Yep. Yep.
if possible,
Absolutely.
when it comes down to that. All right. I think that's a good way to end us today as well. And so John, why don't you give us our contact information again?
So the website is FSA1.com and the phone number is
1-800-977-9292. My name is Mike Wallace. This is the Retireable Podcast.
I'm John Sauger.
Have a great day.
Investment advisory products and services are made available through FSA Advisors, FSAA, a registered investment advisor. Annuity and insurance products are offered through Financial Services of America, Financial Services of America, FSA Health Insurance Agency, doing business as FSA Insurance Agency, FSA Tax and Accounting, and FSA Advisors are commonly owned and operated by FSA Marketing Incorporated. FSAM. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. The insurance products offered by Financial Services of America FSA are not subject to investment advisory requirements. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. FSA. A is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. Chartered Retirement Planning. Counselor and CRPC are trademarks or registered service marks of the College for Financial Planning in the United States and/or other countries. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by FSAA.